Welcome to Make a Path Presents. I'm Ronnie Hayes, and today let's talk about Morgan and Carol. We got our first season 7 look at Morgan here, sporting some new clothes. Not really a lot we can get from the background here. They just kind of put him in front of an old paint chip looking weathered wall, if you know what I mean. And a lot of fans are wondering where Morgan and Carol are, and we're gonna bring up something right now that has to do with the comic. It's not a major spoiler at all. I consider it pretty minor. However, if you're trying to avoid anything whatsoever that has to do with the comic, I would suggest that you leave now, because we will be talking about where Morgan and Carol most likely are. Now, to get into this, in the comic book, Rick is introduced to another community after Hilltop. Now, it's after Rick and the Hilltop make a deal to take care of the Saviors, and it's after the Saviors strike Rick and company, leaving Glenn in a puddle of his own blood and dead. Jesus goes to visit Rick and he says, listen, it's about time you meet Ezekiel. And this is after Jesus was doing some recon work to try to figure out where Negan and the Savior's community is located at. So he takes Rick to this new community called the Kingdom, and they meet their leader at the Kingdom called Ezekiel. Now, he's a very colorful character, wears some really wild clothing, and he has a tiger. Yeah, we're not going to go into it. It's a friggin' tiger, though, from a zoo. And again, we won't go into the details. Most likely they're going to play with some of the details when they bring it to the show. And a lot of fans are asking if they're going to be using a real tiger or CGI. I personally believe they're going to try to ground this more into reality and use both CGI and real tiger and have it a little more realistic as far as maybe the tiger is in a cage or shown off as like a real pet, not necessarily walking all around the kingdom. That is possible, but it might be a little more grounded in reality as opposed to the comic, because with the comic book, you could get away with some of these things that are a little more far out there. Anyway, so in the comic, Rick actually blindly decides to follow Ezekiel as in an ally. He blindly just believes him and everything like that, and it has a certain flow and it works in the comic. However, with the TV show, because we have seen Negan being so calculating that Rick doesn't really have, or he shouldn't really trust Ezekiel right off the bat. So I do believe they're putting Morgan and Carol into this new community called the Kingdom, so that way when Rick, who's going to be very cautious, when he shows up to maybe check on them and meet this new leader, Carol can be like, listen, he saved my life, and Morgan can confirm it. Now, Morgan and Carol are two people that Rick trusts. However, Rick will now see that the person Rick shot at and almost killed, and Morgan stopped him, is the person that eventually would come back around and help Carol bring her and Morgan to a new community called the Kingdom and save her life. And I think that will actually open Rick's eyes a little more. That and what has been going on. All the bloodshed, all the quick, shoot from the hip, ask questions later. That might muddy the waters as far as Rick Grimes' belief system. However, I think that is beneficial to the overall story and playing with the character development. Now, in the show, let's just say that Morgan and Carol are brought to this new community. This new community is run by a guy named Ezekiel, and they are pulling this straight out of the comic. There's no telling what they're going to use the base as. In the comic book, I believe it was like an old school, and they had buses out front. They might remix this in a way to where it's similar, like they're using buses, but instead of being at an old school, they might just use an old library or a bigger building. They did use a library before for that one little small community that could have been working with the Kingdom people. And also, do not forget, I strongly believe that the scene we came upon with Rick and Morgan where they found the bodies with slit throats, I strongly believe that's already going to be a mini story in motion that has to deal with taking over this area and getting out from underneath Negan's control. Now, it might not be a straight-on war as far as the Kingdom already at war with the Saviors, but it could be something where the Kingdom was secretly allying against the library community to rise up against the Saviors, and it went very, very wrong. The library community was killed, but the people at the kingdom was not ratted on, so that way Negan does not know about their involvement. So I think we'll get some hesitation there as far as Ezekiel's concerned. He's hesitant because they lost people, they lost a community already, but he still wants to fight this battle and get out from underneath Negan's rule. Now, this is a lot of speculation. A lot of this isn't in the comic book, and I do believe it could go in a completely different direction. However, I do believe they're already setting the seeds up to put that in the coming story for season 7, and we already started seeing some backstory about the kingdom and about that library community that might actually come up in conversation again in season 7. Now, I did leave a lot of big twists out of this discussion, and I did that on purpose, so if you're still interested in reading the comic and you're just a TV viewer, you can still go back and read the comic and be well surprised by what you read. So, give me your thoughts and opinions. What do you think about this image of Morgan? I will admit it's a little underwhelming. It's just a character portrait with nothing really there to hint of the coming story. But I think it's cool that we see fresh clothing, and it looks like he's in a good place just based off that observation alone, which is the fresh clothing. And I do believe Carol will be healing for a good chunk of the beginning of season 7. It only makes sense because she did get shot twice, you know? Anyway, leave your thoughts and opinions down in that comment box. I'm done talking. It's your turn. Subscribe now.